Now, have you ever ignored your gut and then months later looked back and thought, damn, I knew it? Like, I knew something was off. Welcome to Amor de Luna. I'm Crystal, relationship coach for women, and I teach you how to attract the provider and protector man with neuroscience and biblical principles. Let's get into the hidden cost of ignoring your gut. Now, have you ever ignored your gut and then months later looked back and thought, damn, I knew it? Like, I knew something was off. I knew I shouldn't have done that. I knew I shouldn't have dated him. I knew I shouldn't have taken that opportunity. I knew I shouldn't have signed that contract. Whatever it is, the question isn't usually, did you know? The question is, why didn't you listen to your gut? And I think that's something we don't really talk about enough, because when people say, trust your gut, okay, what does that even mean? Like, seriously, we've all heard people say women's intuition, okay, but what is women's intuition? Like, what are we actually talking about? And honestly, I don't even think it's just women. I think men have it too. I think all of us have moments where something inside of us is telling us, or at least trying to get our attention. Maybe you call it intuition, maybe you call it discernment, maybe you just say something felt off. Whatever you call it, I think we've all experienced it. Now here's where things get interesting. I love learning about the brain. I love learning about neuroscience, and I love learning about the Bible because, well, for me, those two things don't compete with each other. I think they complement each other. See, neuroscience tells us what your brain is constantly processing information and what you're not consciously aware of. It's picking up on facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, patterns, past experiences, things that your conscious mind hasn't even caught up to yet. So have you ever met someone and you're like, I don't know, something just feels off. Like, nothing happened. They didn't necessarily say anything wrong. They didn't do anything in particular. You just can't explain it. Like, something is wrong. Sometimes your brain is recognizing patterns before your conscious mind can even explain them. Now, that doesn't mean that your gut is always right. And I want to make that really clear, because sometimes what we call our gut is actually anxiety. Sometimes it's trauma. Sometimes it's fear. So I'm not going to say every feeling you have is the truth. What I am saying is that maybe we shouldn't dismiss those feelings so quickly either. So here's where my faith comes in. As a Christian, I believe God gave us discernment, not paranoia or fear, discernment. And when I started taking my faith seriously, this confused me so much. Like, people would always say, God told me to do this, or I felt God leading me to that. And I'm just sitting there like, where? Like, where are y'all hearing him? Like, I don't understand, because I'm asking questions and I don't hear anything. What does his voice sound like? How do you know it's actually God? How do you know it's not your own thoughts or the devil even? How do you know it's not just what you want? Those were genuine questions that I had, and I wasn't trying to be like disrespectful. I just really wanted to know. And with the background where I really hated religion at one point, I wanted to get my questions answered. And here's what I learned. I don't think God's voice is usually loud. I think it's that little nudge, that quiet conviction, that feeling you almost ignore because it isn't screaming at you. And it's that little voice that says, wait, or maybe don't do that, or reach out to that person, or be patient. The loud voice, at least for me, is usually my fear, my anxiety, my overthinking. It's every reason why I shouldn't trust God. But that quiet conviction, I've learned to pay attention to it. And here's the important part. Just because I feel something doesn't automatically mean that it's God. That's where I think a lot of people get confused, including myself, because I used to think, well, if I feel it, maybe that's God. Not necessarily. For me, the way I know whether something is from God, pretty simple. Does it align with who God says he is? Does it align with scripture? Because God isn't going to lead me to do something that contradicts his own character. So yes, I believe God can use that quiet prompting, but I also believe he gives us his word so we can test it. So what does it actually cost you? Because when I say there's a hidden cost to ignoring your gut, I don't necessarily mean that bad like something bad happens the next day. Sometimes it does, but a lot of time it doesn't. That's why it's so easy to ignore your gut, because if every bad decision immediately blew up in our face, we'd probably stop making them. But life doesn't work like that. Sometimes the consequences don't show up until months later, years later, and then you're sitting there wondering, how the hell did I end up here? And when really, if you're honest with yourself, there was probably moments where you knew everything, not knew exactly what would happen, but you knew something just wasn't right. Just didn't sit right with you. Let's say you're sitting down with somebody, for example, because you wanted to do business together. And on paper, they're everything you've been looking for. They have money, they're driven, they're a great communicator, they're really good at growing businesses, they're good at solving problems. They're everything you wrote down that you wanted in a business partner. However, as you're sitting there with them, you're thinking, okay, this is perfect, but every time I leave a meeting with them, I'm like, I don't know. Like, I can't explain it. Nothing happened. But I don't know. There's just something that feels off. And because you can't explain it, you talk yourself out of it. I'm probably overthinking this. Maybe I'm just nervous. Maybe this is just fear. So you move forward anyways. Then 6 months later, you realize they weren't loyal to you. Maybe they started making decisions behind your back. Maybe they were hiding money. Maybe another opportunity came along and they left the second it benefited them. Whatever it is, you look back and think, I knew. Not because you could predict the future, but because your brain was probably picking up on things your conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. And this is where neuroscience gets really interesting. Your brain is constantly recognizing those patterns before we're aware of them, right? Maybe it was the way they talked about people. Maybe it was how they treated the waiter. Maybe it was the inconsistency between what they said and how they acted. You couldn't explain it, but your brain noticed it. That doesn't mean your gut is always right. It just means maybe we shouldn't ignore it so quickly. We should really evaluate and lean into those things and know the difference. And honestly, I think relationships are probably where we ignore our gut the most, because love is a funny way of making us negotiate with red flags. I mean, have you ever noticed that? You're like, well, maybe he didn't mean it like that. Or maybe she's just had a hard life. Or maybe it'll get better once we're married. Oh my gosh. Or maybe once they heal, we become really, really good at explaining away the things we already know aren't okay. Because on paper, they're everything we wanted. They're attractive, they love God, they have a good job, they want kids, they're funny, they're ambitious, whatever's on your list, they check the boxes. But you never have peace. You're constantly trying to convince yourself. And here's something I've learned. Peace doesn't usually need convincing. Chaos does, however. Have you ever just randomly thought about somebody, not because someone mentioned them, not because Facebook reminded you it was a birthday, not because you saw an old picture? I mean, they just like popped up in your head. This has happened to me so many times, and for a long time I just straight ignored it. Now if someone comes to my mind and I can't explain why, I'll usually send them a text, because maybe God was trying to have me think of them that day. So I say, hey, I hope you're doing okay. I just wanted you to know I love you. That's it. You know how many times people have responded with, you have no idea how much I needed that today. Or, thank you. I really needed a reminder that I had somebody. And honestly, what did it cost me? 30 seconds? But imagine if I ignored it. And this is a small example, right? But let's bring it back to the point, right? The hidden cost isn't always something that happens that's terrible or bad. Sometimes it's the opportunity you never stepped into. Maybe it's the person you never encouraged, or the business you never started, a relationship you stayed in way too long, or the relationship you walked away from because fear was making the decision instead of wisdom. Frustration and stress was making the decision instead of wisdom. This is why I think recognizing that quiet voice matters, because I don't think the biggest mistakes we make are because we didn't know. I think a lot of the times is because we do know, and we're convincing ourselves not to listen. I think one of the reasons why we ignore our gut is because we really want certainty. We want God to send us like this billboard message. We want him to literally say, Crystal, don't do it. And that's usually not how God has worked in my life. Usually it's just the quiet little nudge. Here's what I've learned. Not everything that's true can be explained immediately. Sometimes wisdom shows up before words do. So, but how do you know it's God, right? Here's the question that I wrestled with for a long time. How do you know that it's actually from God? I realized I was looking for the wrong things though, eventually. What I've personally experienced, it's usually not a voice at all. It's more like a quiet conviction, almost like this gentle nudge that doesn't leave me alone. And what's interesting is it's usually not telling me what I want to hear. It's telling me to be patient when I don't want to be patient. It's telling me to forgive when I really don't want to forgive. It's telling me to wait when I want to move. It's telling me to apologize when I think I'm right. It's telling me to trust God when I'd rather have control. And that's how I started realizing maybe that isn't just me. Because if it were me, if I'd probably tell myself to do whatever was easiest for me. And not every feeling is discernment. Sometimes it's trauma, sometimes insecurity, pride. Something it's just me really wanting something really, really badly. And if I want something badly enough, I can convince myself of almost anything. That's why feelings alone cannot be the standard. So how do I know? If it doesn't align with God's character, it's not from him. God's not going to lead me to be dishonest, bitter. He's not going to tell me to manipulate somebody. He's not going to tell me to seek revenge, because that's not who he is. The more I got to know God's character, the easier it became to recognize when something didn't sound like him. Kind of sound like if one of my friends texted me from a random number. I might not recognize the number, but I'd recognized how they talked. I'd recognize the words they use. I'd recognize their heart. And I think it's the same thing with God. The more time you spend with him, the more familiar his character becomes and his voice becomes. And discernment grows. And I don't think discernment is something you're born with or you're not. It just grows. It's there. The more that you begin to recognize the difference between conviction and condemnation, between wisdom and fear, peace and avoidance, I don't think anybody wakes up one day and suddenly hears God perfectly or discern things perfectly. I think it's a relationship just like any other relationship. You spend time together, you learn each other's voices, you learn each other's character. You build trust, and that goes if you have a faith or if you don't. Just replace God with your own self. The lesson that I had to learn, if I'm being completely honest, and there's been times where I didn't listen, I felt like God was telling me to wait, and I didn't. And I wanted something so badly, I convinced myself he's okay with it. Looking back, I don't think God stopped speaking. I think I just stopped listening, because what I wanted was louder than what he was trying to show me. And I think we've all done that at some point. We pray, God, show me what you want. But deep down, you've already decided what you're going to do. We're not actually asking for direction. We were asking God to approve a decision we had already made. And that's really what changed everything for me. It wasn't that God suddenly started speaking louder. It was that I started becoming quieter. I started paying attention. I started noticing patterns. I stopped expecting God to force me, and I started recognizing that he was often inviting me in. And once I started doing that, I realized the hidden cost of ignoring my gut wasn't just making bad decisions. Sometimes it was missing the direction God was trying to lead me in. So what's the hidden cost of ignoring your gut? Sometimes it's money. Sometimes it's the wrong business opportunity or a year spent forcing something that was never meant for you. Sometimes it's missing the chance to encourage someone who needed you that day. But if you've been following me for a while, then you know my heart. I'm passionate about helping women build healthy marriages and choose a husband who is truly a provider and a protector. So you might be thinking, what does all of this have to do with dating? Honestly, everything. Because I realize that most women don't end up in unhealthy relationships because they aren't smart. They don't end up there because they aren't successful or because they don't know what they want. A lot of the time, they end up there because they stopped listening to discernment and started listening to what the world deems as good. They ignore red flags because connection is exciting. They ignored lack of consistently hoping that he'd become the man you needed him to be. I think we've all done that in one way or the other. That's why I care so much about discernment, because I don't want you to just find a husband. I want you to recognize the right one. I don't want you to confuse confidence with leadership or confuse attention with love. I don't want you to confuse potential with commitment. And I certainly don't want you to confuse chemistry with compatibility, because those mistakes don't just cost you time, they cost you your peace. Sometimes they cost you years. Sometimes they make you question your own worth. So if there's one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's don't ignore the quiet conviction. Don't ignore the pause, the questions that keep coming back. Slow down. Pray about it. Test it against scripture. Ask God for wisdom, because maybe the answer isn't that God needs to be louder. Maybe he's been speaking all along and he's inviting you to become quiet enough to recognize his voice. If this video encouraged you, I'd love for you to subscribe, because this is exactly what we talk about here. We're not just learning how to date, we're learning how to become women of wisdom, women that can discern character, protect their peace, and choose the kind of husband who reflects God's design for love, leadership, and commitment. And I truly believe that one wise decision can change the entire direction of your life. So I'll see you next time, amiga. Bye.